The Igniting Impact podcast, brought to you by Public Knowledge, has the honor of continuing to speak with Lindsey Schilling and Alli Anderson. I'm Stacy Moss, the host of the podcast and the president of our management consulting firm. Today, we're continuing to dive into our core values and how they influence impact in our work and our lives. And we're back with Lindsey and Alli, continuing to talk about impact and the Wyoming CCWIS project. Thank you both for joining us again. All right, so next is we talked a little bit about one of our core values, and we talked a little bit about reliability. The next thing I want to do is talk about progress. So one of our aspirational values, so something that we're always kind of driving towards, is progress, which is really about the collective impact or the collective power of impact. And we define this as really wanting each of our engagements to build upon the last, right? Where we're advancing towards the goal of leaving the world better than when we started, which I know sounds very Pollyanna, but it's me. So this is kind of our ultimate reward, right? For generating the evidence to understand what works and its impact, and then kind of redoing that. And for me, the key part of this isn't just figuring out what works, but also what didn't work, and really all about lessons learned. So we take our learnings, whether they're failures or they're wins, and pass them on to future projects or share them with other people. And for me, this is a big part of why I think the podcast is so important, and also why we love to get clients together, is because we can share lessons learned. So what I'm hoping is that we can take some time today to share any lessons learned that you've had, that you're willing to share with others and with listeners, that you will take forward into your next project or into your next days, that will ultimately kind of help you move the needle, or that may help others move the needle and make even more progress in future projects, not necessarily even a future project like this, but just in general, or a future technology project like this.
So we spent years and years talking to other agencies who stood up systems about their lessons learned.
Yep.
And we're very intentional about addressing those in our project management plan. So I think where I go to are maybe some of the unique features of our project currently that we have in place because of somebody else's lessons learned. And I don't know if that's worth calling
I think it's definitely worth sharing. I think anything that you think would be helpful to someone else if they're looking at a project or looking at embarking on something.
So if I go back to the procurement,
yes,
IT procurements are incredibly painful.
Yes.
You'll end up with 900 lines of requirements and still miss like really important ones.
Yep.
No matter how many times you read through it. So I think an innovative approach to this, and I think it was sort of an approach that we came up with in collaboration with PK, is looking at an outcomes-based procurement.
Yeah.
So given that the technology is new to child welfare, the technology is new to juvenile justice, to adult protective services, focusing less on being prescriptive on how the system shall function, focusing on the common outcome that we want to see from a new system, and allowing vendors an opportunity to come in and propose all the different ways that we could get there. I think that was an incredibly unique way of approaching a massive IT system procurement, but worked really well for us.
Yeah.
And then I think to that end, engaging with vendors early. There was a lot of conversation on, do you release a budget? Do you not release a budget? And we went so far as to hold a pre-procurement vendor conference. So we invited all the major players, come have a conversation with me, because when I release this procurement, I can't talk to you. Are we using the same language? Are we using the right words? Am I saying this correctly? If I give you this outcome, do you know what that means? Like, to be sure that we're all on the same page. That was received really well. Yes. And we heard about that from people across the
many
country.
Vendors.
And vendors were excited at the opportunity. So then when it came time for the procurement, it was very competitive. We had a lot of really solid system plans, architecture plans, software application plans that came to us. And that really gave us an opportunity to be picky a little bit.
Well, and what's great about that is it's usually not very competitive in Wyoming, because Wyoming's a very small state. We're small potatoes, so there's not a lot of people that like to bid here, so that's really great.
And I don't know if it's held, but this, I'm pretty, at the time, set the record, or tied the record for the largest response to a procurement that the state had.
An IT system procurement.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So that was maybe not so exciting to the evaluation panel who got to read all of the proposals.
Yeah.
But from a project management perspective, and then the opportunity then to be more selective in the partner that we were going to choose, and to be sure our goals and values were aligned with whomever it was going to come in and build the system for us.
Yeah.
So I think that whole procurement process, we spent a lot of hours talking to a lot of different states and a lot of different agencies in Wyoming who hadn't been met with that same success about how we could do things differently. We were going to get one shot at this, and we knew that. So it couldn't fail. We couldn't have a panel of vendors that blew budgets. We couldn't have, proposals that we're reviewing that didn't meet minimum requirements. So there was a lot of preparation that went into that procurement, and I do think that's why it was so successful.
Yeah, that's a huge win, and I think a really great lesson learned on the win side of that early preparation, that early strategy, that early setting out, here's exactly how we're going to do it and make sure that we do it right. And again, an important lesson for Wyoming because of the size, but not necessarily not applicable to a lot of other places.
Right.
It was not progress by speed in this case. It was progress by being
diligence.
Methodical and doing due diligence and being intentional and understanding the true intent of the agency from the beginning, to be transparent and knowing that they had a lot on the line. There's a lot of states or other projects that we've seen where they skip over parts of the process because of time or budget or all of these different factors, which a lot of times are valid. But in this case, doing the needs assessment, doing the alternatives analysis, doing the cost benefit and the budget pieces, we had a lot of supporting documentation that when things came up, we weren't expecting, like when the legislature decided to do an audit of all these IT projects, they had nothing to go off of on this project that was not prepared for. It was well thought out. There were no red flags about any of the preparation that was done. Yeah. So it really counted in those moments, and it counted for the vendors and the bidders conference, and it mattered when the decision was made. There really was not a lot of feedback from vendors. I think there's oftentimes been procurements in Wyoming and across the country where the announcements get contentious because people feel like they were slighted in some, or vendors I should say, feel like they were slighted in some way or some part of the process was wrong. We didn't get a lot of battles here because it was that everything was so transparent and so honest, and that I feel like there just wasn't a lot of room for people to say like, oh, they misstepped, because we didn't, and it was thoughtful the whole way through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the other big thing that comes to mind, having been through quite a few
yes you have
projects, seeing some done well and seeing some done not so well, I think we knew very early on that staff engagement, internal transparency and buy-in, not from our leadership, because we had that. It was from our staff whose day-to-day work stands to be completely upended by implementation of this new system, that we think is a good idea, but do they think is a good idea?
Huge.
So we have, from the very beginning, the project kickoff, openly invited, if you have time, if you're interested. We've recorded every requirement session, every discovery session. We have open email addresses for questions.
Yeah.
Some of it's painful, some of it gets us down rabbit holes, but I think it's all very relevant in the fact that these are the things that they're worried about having in a new system. When we go to implementation, they want to be able to do these things.
And again, it may slow you down now,
yes,
but it's going to help get you quicker later.
Yes.
And again, most IT systems aren't failing because of the technology. They're failing because of the people not accepting them and adapting and using them.
So setting the expectations very clearly up front is not going to be easy.
No.
This is going to be a long process, a very time-consuming process.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we got through about the first 3 or 4 months, and they're like, oh, this isn't bad at all.
Great.
And then we hit like month 7, they're like, oh my gosh. When like 16 hours of my week, discovery and refinement and configuration sessions,
it's
to
so
be
much.
sure that we get every detail that we need in the right place, in the right screen, with the fewest touches, the most effective way to do it. If we, eliminating duplicate data entry, carrying over fields from risk assessments to auto-populate safety plans and case plans. I mean, all of that is what's going to make it more efficient.
Yeah.
We don't want to rebuild our current functionality on a new platform. And that's been, I sound like a broken record when I talk to people and I say that, but it is also the very hardest thing.
It's the hardest thing to do
for everybody to do, because all they know
is
this system.
And that's the danger, right? Because you need them to come along. You need them to come along early, but you don't want them to rebuild the broken things into the new shiny object.
Yes.
So.
And I think the good decision that happened there as part of the procurement is that in addition to looking for a partner with technology platforms, we wanted a partner in subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
Somebody who knew the child welfare system, had experience in child welfare, experience in juvenile justice, experience in APS, who could bring outside perspectives, different suggestions to different processes, who knew how they had to train this in order to get the processes to stick at a local level. And I think that's where this particular vendor caught my eye.
No, that's another great lessons learned. Yeah, because building an IT system without understanding the program that they're in it is such a very different thing.
Well, and that's interesting too, because you talked about how you talk to so many states about these IT system implementations, but it should be said that CCWIS is very new still in the world of these big system modernizations. And so there is still not a state that meets full CCWIS compliance. We are striving very hard to be that first state.
We'll I was going to say, you're paving the path.
Well on our way. But, there's still there were so many vendors for all of the response that we got. One of our lessons learned in the vendor conversation, I think, was, you can't ask for a vendor to be CCWIS compliant. You couldn't ask a vendor fairly to say, you have years of experience with CCWIS. You could say, do you have some experience with CCWIS, right? But there were those little lessons along the way, or those little bits of information too, that I think allowed for that, where it was really not about, do you have CCWIS background as a vendor? It was, do you have the people that can come to the table and know how to have conversations and make this collaboratively happen, along with the technical functionality. And so that's what's so interesting. And it's also created kind of a collaboration from the vendor side that I don't think happens in every system implementation either, because they know what's on the line. Because this is a new modernization, there's pressure on the vendor to deliver it and to say, we worked with the state effectively on this topic, built this system as their users needed it, and we're able to deliver on that. So there's pressure from all sides, and that's what's helping push this forward and make sure that everything's getting done effectively.
Yeah, but having a vendor that understands child welfare and the practice, like the practice of child welfare, is huge, and more than just the IT.
It brings credibility to the process.
Well, and for the workers, right, to see that in those refinement sessions too, I'm sure brings that credibility. What else? What other lessons learned? Anything on the project management or OCM sides?
I think on the OCM side, Lindsay's talked about it a little bit, but I think sometimes people think, small teams are the only way you're ever going to move forward with decisions. And I think we've acknowledged that sometimes it takes a little bit longer because we've got a lot of people to involve in the process. But I think, both of you kind of touched on this, like it matters in the end. It matters that there's that buy-in. It matters that they all feel collectively that they've had an impact or had a say or kind of had a seat at the table. And so I think there has been times where we've paused and assessed and said, are you still feeling heard? Is this the right amount of information at the right cadence? We've tried to do that, or ask the questions. We have these monthly change champions meetings with this very large group of change champions. I think, by project management standards, one would say, oh, you want 10 to 15 people, or something in that range. We have over 50. And so it's a lot, because you're talking to a large group and there's a lot of, voices to try and make sure are heard. But when we share new information or say, are you getting enough information or whatever, we also feel like we're getting a really good collective response for the agency. We're not saying, well, these 5 people would like it monthly, but maybe everybody else wants it weekly.
Yeah.
Like, we really feel like we have a good sample and good understanding of how communication is. But like I said, we've had times where we've been like, maybe now we do a check-in. Like maybe we've lost a little participation, or maybe we need to how can we bring something shiny to this meeting, because the last 3 have kind of been the same, trying to rethink that all the time. But the OCM has been, I think, really good along the way, but there's definitely been some little lessons here and there with people. And with the contract too, as good as this RFP was, we've still had times where it's been like, we missed it. Like, we missed this thing. And so catching it early and having group discussions and sitting down and being like, how did we miss it? How do we fix it?
Yep.
And then taking the steps to do that, has been important on the early side. And so there's, like, we're seeing that with some of the implementation stuff. There's pieces of the functionality that actually kind of go to a different vendor, and were the right agreements in place, and who's holding them accountable, and do we have that kind of holistically covered? And the answer to some of those things was no. And so now we're like, let's get it covered now before we get to the end, and so nobody can hold them accountable. And so even with as well as this has gone, we've still had those hiccups. So
for those that aren't knee deep in change management every day, tell them what change champions are and how you're using them on this project.
Yeah, change champions are identified individuals within the organization or group that you're working with that can help be the agents for change, or the sort of both microphones and speakers for kind of how this change is going to go through whatever that larger group is. So in this case, Lindsey and the leadership team is the ultimate decision makers from a contract perspective. But there are hundreds of caseworkers and stakeholders and whatever that are part of the voice. And so there's got to be something between there. And so these change champions are identified folks that are caseworkers, supervisors, state office, administrative staff, foster care coordinators, etc. Kind of expand across the agency, and they represent a voice. And so we've asked them, they committed to saying, I will hear this information, I will offer my insight, as much as I can, for the system, but I will also take this information and take it back. Or if people ask them questions, we've charged them with saying, if people come and ask you, help them, navigate that. We also encourage them every month when we have these meetings to continue the excitement about the system, right? Like Lindsey mentioned, we're starting in that pain point period now where there's been quieter times and people get nervous, or there's been really heavy weeks where people are overwhelmed. And it's like, remember the end goal. Like, you guys are the agents that are going to help make sure.
Be the cheerleader.
Yes, to be the cheerleader, exactly. And so they have a big role to play. So it's they don't necessarily get to decide everything, but they have a little bit bigger voice. But they also have to answer a lot of questions from the field and kind of take some of that cheerleadering on that we just can't possibly do with the 8 of us that are on this sort of core group at the top. So.
How did you guys choose who was going to be in the cheer in those roles? Were they volunteers, or did you choose them? Okay, good.
And we took everybody who volunteered.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
We didn't cap it, and I think that's why we have 50 some odd people.
Yeah, I bet.
But they're spread across the state.
Okay.
Right, so they bring perspectives from our big, huge offices in in our bigger cities, and the office where there's one person, that handles all of these different activities from that office. So very diverse.
Did you get people from every office?
I think every district.
Okay, good.
So
good.
with the state being divided into the 9 judicial districts, definitely have representation from all districts and from all positions within the division. From my position to our program managers, to our district managers, our supervisors, our caseworkers, our admin assistants, our foster care coordinators. There's a representation from all different levels. So I think that's really worked well. I sort of see them as their embedded project thermometers.
Yeah.
Like, let me know what's going on out there, and really are super important in keeping the project sort of on track, and so that we're not losing buy-in or losing participation or losing interest, that we don't have, staff that are super frustrated that go out to their small communities and start talking about this project that DFS is doing.
Exactly.
And how horrible it is after we did all of this work to get the funding and to get this opportunity. So we've been very open about that too. That, there are open communication channels. They can go through their supervisor. They can come straight to me. They can go through our email. They can go to PK. Whatever the question is, whatever the concern is, and they see a response.
That's good.
So it's not just an email I sent out into La La Land.
Yeah, goes into the ether.
There's legitimate follow-up.
Yeah.
that happens after we receive that information.
And are they mostly newer staff or staff that have been there for a long time, or a good mix?
Combination.
That's great. That's
We
good.
have a couple of our district managers that are helping configure the system that were here when they configured
the
the CCWIS
yeah,
system.
I love it.
And they're super excited, so that makes me really happy.
They're not exhausted yet.
Right?
I love
Nope,
it.
they keep showing up.
Okay, well, looking at the whole of your time, both of your times with the project, what's the biggest advice or lessons learned that you would give people? Like, make sure you do this, or make sure you don't do this.
I would say make sure you take the time to think through it from start to finish. And I do a lot of times, we might have money this year, so we have to hurry up and, that's probably not the best way.
Not for a system like this. Actually,
to
give our
approach
audience an idea of because I feel like unless you're embedded in this work, you don't understand the size of a project like this.
Oh, yeah.
Give them an idea of the size of this project. Like how many people and dollars and time.
So our budget exception request was $26 million,
Yeah.
and we've been working on getting that funding since 2016.
Yeah.
We got it in 2021.
Yes.
And it's going to go live in 2024. So
24,
8
and it was
years.
a 5-year project. So we proposed funding for a 5-year project with the expectation that then the ongoing operations, maintenance, system licensing will be covered internally by the agency once we fully move from our current CCWIS system over to the new system.
So 8 years, 26 million, and how many people do you think are working on this project? You got 50 change champions, but how many other people?
I mean, everyone has a
Hundreds.
role in the project, because if they're not a change champion, they're likely taking on extra
Yeah.
cases and extra work at the local level so that we can have.
And how many people are at the agency?
Well, there are 600 people in the agency. In our division, we have just over 300.
And 300 people.
So
Yeah.
300 people, and they are all in some way play a role in the success of this project.
So definitely not something to rush.
No.
Yeah.
And that's the agency, and then the stakeholders. You think about the Attorney General's
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
Attorneys and the judges.
Yeah, and the stakeholders that are going to have interfaces into
Yeah.
the system. So there's the other departments in the state and the IT division for the state and all of that. There's
Providers,
Yeah.
foster parents, automating the application and recertification and
Yeah.
giving them in a window into who is this child that came into my house at 3 a.m. and, are they on medications? Do they have allergies? That will all be readily accessible at the time of that placement.
Yeah.
Instead of it being something that we have to chase down over a few days while we're really hoping that nothing happens.
Great advice.
Yes.
Okay, Alli, what would you say? Most important thing that they do or not do?
I really feel like it's been a balance of trust and communication. I
Okay.
can't pick between the two because I think without one of them, it still would not be as successful as it has been. I think that the communication and the open, honest intent from the beginning to be transparent, to put it all on the table, to share your opinions from everybody, like whether it just, with our work between PK and DFS, like at the strategy level, clear down to the caseworkers, right? The communication has been key. But it's also a trust thing, because there's projects where if, speaking from the consulting side, where if we have a client that cannot hold up their side, if we're trying to help them and they are not committed to seeing it through, there's not that buy-in at the leadership level or whatever, you hit roadblock after roadblock no matter how much you try. And then from the other side too, if we're not holding up our side, if we're not helping them meet the deadlines, if we're not getting them the information that's helpful and needed, they can't go on and make that sell and make those decisions.
Yeah.
So I really do think it's like that merge of the two that has been the most successful.
Well,
Sure.
and communication builds trust, right?
Yeah,
too.
they're connected.
Yeah, they're
definitely.
very connected. Okay, great. Okay, well, we're done talking about the Wyoming CCWIS project. But I have a little fun, quick exercise that we're going to do to just close out. I'm going to do this to close out all of our podcasts. And then we'll be done. I'll let you get on with your day. So we built this podcast around just one of our 3 core values, impact. But to close out each of our podcasts, I'm going to ask each of our guests to share their kind of quick wisdom on our other 2 core values with the audience. So I just have 2 more final questions for you. I'm going to read you the definitions, our PK definitions of our other 2 core values, which are inclusion and teamwork. And then I'm going to give you a minute of quiet to think about your best advice for our audience on achieving both of them. There are no wrong answers. And so just give it a quick thought and off-the-cuff answers and share your thoughts. Are you ready? Okay, the first one is we're going to start with is inclusion. So our definition for inclusion is that we recognize the fundamental value and strength of all individuals. Our teams create a safe space for open, inclusive, and diverse participation of all peers, clients, and ideas. We build high levels of trust and belonging. And so, Alli, you're going to go first, and then you can go next. Lindsey, we'll give you a minute to think about it. But the question is, with that definition in mind, what is your best advice for achieving high levels of inclusion in the workplace?
It's hard not to use this project as an example because we just talked about it, but I think we have to get outside of sort of this need in culture right now to choose a side, right? The choosing of sides or the feeling of this sort of separation that I think has happened culturally is contradictory to these movements in inclusion and diversity and all of these different things. And I think when it comes to projects, right, like there is so much information you can get from somebody that's in the field doing the work, but there's so much knowledge you can get from the administrator sitting in the office that knows the policies and the practice and the federal requirements and all of that. And if you don't bring all of those people together, if you don't bring people together in a child welfare system that have lived experience alongside those that are in the courts every day battling and fighting for these decisions, alongside the caseworkers or the CASA workers or the GALs, right, who are intimately involved with these families, if you do not have all of those voices, you will not be providing the best services for kids and families, period. Whether it's with a CCWIS system or anything in child welfare, I just think that child welfare is the perfect example for how stakeholders have to be diverse to make effective change, because if you leave out the voice of those living it, you're never going to meet their needs. If you leave out the voices of those that are on the legal side, you're going to miss something and it's not going to be effective. So I just think that it's crucial in child welfare, it's crucial in the world, it's crucial with this project to make sure that all voices are heard from all sides.
So is it avoiding polarity, like avoiding it, or embracing it and making sure that all voices are there? Is that?
I think it's avoiding polarity from a place of defensiveness or a place of
either or.
Yeah, it's not about competition, it's about collaboration, right? Okay. It's not about me versus them. It's about how do we find what our differences are and acknowledge those differences, but still come to the table and say, how do we move forward and make decisions that are in the best interest of all rather than the best interest of self?
All right, Lindsey, what's your best advice for achieving high levels of inclusion in the work?
So my head goes straight to visioning. Mm-hmm. And inclusion happens inherently when you have a large group of people that share the same vision. So from my perspective, having those conversations with our teams across the state, what is your perfect child welfare system in 5 years? And if we can agree on what we're chasing, then I think generally everybody has a tendency to feel like they're included and part of the process to get there. So if you set the vision and then create those opportunities for people to be involved in the process, I think it just kind of brings everybody together. And you can still have 5 different ways of getting there.
Yeah.
We're just all going in the same direction.
Yeah, that's true. What is the current vision at DFS? I heard you talk about families belong together earlier. Is that where you feel like it is, or?
Yeah. So I'm going to be really honest.
Yeah.
So my vision for the social services division, for DFS, for juvenile justice, for adult protective services, is that people eventually come to see us as a resource and as a partner, and as somebody that can be helpful, and that it's not this negative thing to fear. Mm-hmm. We have a lot to offer. We have a lot of really knowledgeable staff, a lot of really dedicated staff, a lot of really solid programs, like well-intentioned programs, and some of them are well-funded. But this ideological barrier, when you just say, I work at DFS, and I don't always tell people that. And that's just the real, I work for the state of Wyoming. If I don't want to get into that conversation right then, that's my go-to answer. But I want us to get to a place where we're a partner and a collaborator and, a host of resources when families see themselves start to digress into a crisis situation. If they need help with childcare, if they need help with short-term behavior support, or identifying appropriate access to services, or even under a voluntary, I know this is going really sideways and I can see this happening in my family unit. If I voluntarily work with DFS, they have these services, they have caseworkers, they'll help me through this. I don't want us to be the enemy.
Well, I can say I knew the families belonging together about you personally was your values, but when you said it earlier in your professional capacity, I got goosebumps. I haven't heard anyone say that for a very long time from our agency. It was pretty exciting. So
they do better. And I, going back to, the kiddos that we have at home, it was a rough situation for them, and I wish it would have ended differently. And I'm so grateful for the lessons that they continue to teach me. Yeah. But they will forever be scarred by going through the process, by being separated, by not knowing where mom is right now. Yeah. And I know it's, the agency can go above and beyond, and families still make decisions, right? There was just nothing that could be done in that situation, but but I think that's why then, after that experience, then coming to the agency and seeing it from a different side and having that as a constant reminder, the dinner table is just sort of this.
It's a driver.
I'm a lifer.
It's a driver.
I'm a DFS lifer.
Yeah, it's a driver.
As long as they'll have me.
Second one, teamwork. We do more than just work together. We respect, trust, and care for each other. This collaboration and belonging extends to our clients as much as our colleagues. With that definition in mind, what is your best advice for achieving high levels of teamwork in the workplace?
I think if I look at like an internal team and then like how we kind of connect that to clients, internally it's crucial, much like inclusivity, but that everybody has a voice at the table. PK has always been about limiting hierarchy because we all have the gifts and the skills and the talents and the abilities and all of that we bring to each project. And so servant leadership is something that I value, but I also feel like PK supports and encourages to say we are all part of this team. We are all taking ownership in the results. We all take ownership in the faults and the wins and all of that. And I just feel like it's about celebrating the abilities and the skills that people have, helping them and coaching them and mentoring them through the skills that they may lack in, and just kind of moving forward together, as much as we can. And I think with clients, it goes back to those same things, but it's about trust, it's about reliability, it's about, all of those things. If we don't show up and deliver what is expected of us, then we are failing them. And as consultants, I feel like oftentimes when people hear, much like you have the stigma around being a DFSer, right? Like consultants, it's better than I would argue attorneys, baby, but there's still sort of a like, oh, you tell people what to do. And that is not what I have ever felt like what we do. We are here to partner, right? Like it's sort of eerie the way you talked about that, how similar we feel, I think, in the consulting world, right? Like we want to partner, we want to create a team, we want to have mutual trust. We want to make sure that at the end we are as excited about the result as you guys are. And so I just think that, if you do those things early on, if you set good expectations, if you're on that same path and that same vision like you talked about, then the trust comes and the teamwork comes. And it just, I feel like, this project in particular is one where we operate as a unit, right? Like there is no better definition of teamwork at the end of the day than saying that you operate as one, right? Yeah. And so I just feel like it's powerful that we've been able to get there, but it's been because of things like setting expectations early and communicating well and building trust and all of that.
And I go straight to the importance of trust and relationships. And I find myself giggling sometimes. We're a relationship-based agency.
Yeah.
So.
Yes.
Those relationships internal to the agency are just as important. And I think I focus really hard on practicing what I preach.
Mm.
Keeping families together is important. Vulnerable adults at home is important. Probation kids being able to stay in communities and work in local communities is important. So inherently we're establishing a value that families are important. That also has to be modeled with your workforce.
Yeah.
And so that is primarily the one thing I continue to emphasize. Everybody is a wife first, a mother first, a sister first, a professional last, because we'd all much rather be doing those other things, when situations allow. So being flexible, and I think having those values and modeling those values inherently brings people closer together.
Yeah, builds trust.
Because when I know that I have a supervisor that understands that piece of me, and that, my kids are always going to be, my priority, and I'll work from wherever, and I will call into the meeting, and I'll be there as much as I can, but ultimately, family is important. And that has to be modeled for staff as well as for the families that we serve. It's hard sometimes.
It is.
We have 16 hours of configuration meetings.
It's hard.
It is really hard. But you have to, that's my no exception rule.
Well, and as a leader, you have to model it or no one will believe it when you say it. And I've had to learn that too. It's like if you say, hey, it's important for you to spend time with your family and prioritize your family, but you're never doing it, they think it's just lip service.
Yeah.
So it's a very hard thing.
And even down to the smallest things. We all do it. I will send email when I have a chance, and sometimes that's 10 o'clock at night or 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I don't expect you to read it. And
I know.
But they do. So, learning how to use the scheduling functionality in my email so that those actually won't go out until 8 o'clock Monday morning. So I think it's much on me being respectful of that and not taking advantage of the fact that I know that we have staff that do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sometimes it's incredibly helpful, but I really try not to. But I have to do those same things that I ask staff to do.
Okay. Well, I can't thank you both enough for your time today. Thanks for joining me. It's a great privilege to be here with you, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time, this is Stacy signing off.